The Grand Palace of Versailles, with its opulence in the form of soaring ceilings and glimmering chandeliers, has more than enough fine silk and satin to cover the entire planet twice over. But if you took a moment to notice, you would immediately notice a terrible smell that was bad enough to wilt a bouquet of roses from 20 paces away. Welcome to Versailles in the 17th century, where beauty mixed brutally, elegance danced among filth, and a royal woman, despite having the privilege of splendor, lived within a world of complete filthy neglect. Today, we are going to dive right into the shocking lack of hygiene that existed among noble women at this time of absolute French royalty. Here are the 5 worst hygiene habits of noble women. If you were a noble woman, you wouldn't believe the way you lived. During the 17th century in France, people were expected to present themselves with elegance, beauty, and sophistication. However, when it comes down to actual personal cleanliness and hygiene, the experience is not so pleasant. For instance, bathing, the act we now associate with being clean, was something most people avoided at all costs. The reason for this was that the medical professionals of this time had yet to completely grasp the science behind personal hygiene, and therefore viewed bathing in warm water as potentially dangerous. These doctors thought that bathing would open the skin, in particular the pores, allowing disease and infection to enter the body through the skin as well as the air we breathe. Additionally, bathhouses during this period were viewed as places of sin by the church, thus creating a culture in which bathing was discouraged and water became less and less frequent in daily life. Women were not provided with individual baths, nor did they have the luxury to take a shower on a daily basis throughout their lifetime. It was very uncommon for women during this time period to bathe at all. During this period, completely washing one's body was seen not only as unnecessary, but also dangerous or potentially blasphemous by many members of the nobility. In fact, the majority of noblewomen and other members of the nobility used a small damp cloth to wash their faces, hands, and occasionally their neckline with small amounts of so-called bath water. However, these cloths were not soaked in clean water. Most often, they were merely bacterial-infested cloths that had been soaked in one or more of the following: vinegar, alcohol, or even saliva. This practice was said to provide a means of cleaning the body, but at the same time limit the amount of direct contact the body would have with water. On the very rare occasions when bathing was completed by an individual, it was not a private practice. Families shared a tub of water and took turns bathing, one after another. Men went first, followed by their female family members. By the time a woman climbed into the tub of water, it was usually lukewarm and cloudy-looking with only the remains of bath oils and dirt floating upon it. It may not have been possible to even get into the water in order to soak the body. The smell also created a negative perception of the royal palace to visitors. The smell was said to travel through the palace's corridors and was described as a unique mixture of aged perfumes, human perspiration, animal fats, and mildew. While the royal family cared about their outward appearance, they had different ideas about what constituted cleaning for women, who were expected to be role models of elegance and grace. The royal women's appearance was in stark contrast to the neglect of their bodies. The condition of their skin indicated not having washed in over a month. The phrase, "looking like $1 million from a distance," is a true example of the royals' idea of beauty. And even if bathing was clearly out of the question, the next hygiene practice, or lack thereof, is something we just take for granted today, which is all the toilets. The Palace of Versailles, the most extravagant building of its day, full of design fixtures and overflowing with wealth, housed the most powerful rulers of Europe. However, it may surprise a lot of you to find out that the royal palace of Versailles barely had a functioning toilet. That's right. Hundreds of rooms full of treasures, with thousands of guests, basically had no toilets at all. The palace had chamber pots that were basically small bowls that were portable and would be kept under the bed, or hidden in a closet, or placed behind drapes for visitors. Essentially, if a guest had to go, they used a chamber pot, and then they, or an attendant, would throw it out the window. If the wind was blowing the wrong way, or if there were a lot of people in the street below, that could result in a very rapidly unfortunate encounter. Some courtiers didn't even bother with pots. Men would just pee off of balconies or go to the garden of the palace to do their thing. Visitors and diplomats from abroad were horrified by what they encountered, and this wasn't just an occasional event. This was happening consistently. Due to its horrible smell, the palace was known for being disgusting, so much that the hallways were sometimes used as makeshift toilets. Imagine yourself as a waiting lady in the palace's hallways. You are walking gracefully through the hallways while wearing an elaborate dress, holding your skirts up with your hands to prevent stepping into human waste as part of showing off your embroidered dress. The smell became so bad that in 1715, a royal decree was issued that the palace's hallways were to be cleaned once every week, instead of daily, or after a royal event, like cleaning up after a death, which is how far they had come in human waste removal by then. Then, of course, there's the wiping part. Toilet paper was not invented yet, so people used cloth scraps, leaves, straw, or much less often, their own hands. The cleaning that took place was very little to almost none. When you had the disposal system of a window with such questionable cleaning methods, it is not strange to think that people would have parasites and sick from disease. The most visually striking aspect of royal women's hair was the wigs worn by ladies of the Palace of Versailles, the capital of Europe's fashion world. These wigs were not your everyday, run-of-the-mill styles. They were works of art, constructed using all types of embellishments like ribbons, pearls, flowers, and even ships. That's right. A small ship sits atop the powdered curls of many women who wore wigs at that time. To create these colossal masterpieces, wigs were stuffed to insane heights with many types of stuffing materials such as metal frames, horsehair, feathers, wool, and cotton. After creating the height of the wig, generous amounts of pomade were used to sculpt the wig into place, made primarily from beef tallow, and allowed the wig to maintain its height due to the electrical properties of fat. With a substantial amount of fat on the wig, it became a perfect breeding ground for lice, as women didn't frequently wash their hair nor remove their elaborate wigs for occasional washing. The lice population grew in these elaborate hairstyles. Women who lived in royal societies used a special kind of long-handled silver lice claw to alleviate scratching their heads due to lice infestations. However, by doing so, the women could maintain their beauty. These claws were intricately decorated and were often attended to in restaurants, social gatherings, and at times when they would need to set their glasses down while sipping a beverage, allowing the women to discreetly alleviate a head itch without ruining their outward appearance. It was common for noblewomen to wear wigs that were overly large and heavy, so many did not experience comfortable wear of the wigs. There were also risks of injury related to the wigs. For example, they could easily burn from candles, leaving some women with burns and hair loss. Each noblewoman's wig was an obligation to maintain her status at court. Thus, when a noblewoman had a sock-sized load of lice in her hair, she had to remain in a public environment until it was appropriate to take off her wig. An example of how poor women dealt with lice was that they shaved their heads, thus eliminating lice. The opposite was true for noblewomen, who acquired wigs to show off their appearance rather than using their own natural hair. Let's take a look at another aspect of the life of a royal that should have been filled with good times and happy moments. Food. Royal banquets were famous for their elaborate displays. They featured tables piled high with amazing roast meats, fish and fowl, sweet pies and cakes, and all manner of fruits and vegetables that had been preserved with either honey or sugar. However, along with all these foods came a very dark and disgusting secret. The kitchens of the palace were not free of the same hygiene problems associated with the rest of the palace. In fact, the kitchen became victims of these same problems. The lack of a properly functioning sewage system at Versailles resulted in many instances where raw human waste backed up into cooking areas. Many accounts have stated that raw sewage entered the private kitchens of Queen Marie Antoinette, the same kitchen where she cooked and served her guests as well as herself, at least once. The result was extremely detrimental to the safety of the foods that she prepared for herself. Without any method of cooling, ventilating, or disposing of food waste and other contaminants, it was an almost daily occurrence for meat to rot and decay rapidly. Fruits and vegetables could not be stored for long periods, some for days, without spoiling. Insects and rodents infested the kitchens, and, despite the unsanitary conditions, the chefs and cooks were expected to serve food to royal guests, even when they had knowledge of the potential for food contamination. Gastrointestinal distress was widespread among the royal court. Although vomiting, diarrhea, and infections were commonplace, the parasite infestation posed the greatest threat. The royal courtiers were often infected with intestinal worms, particularly tapeworms, due to eating improperly cooked meats and the filthy environments of the kitchens. Even Louis XIV was affected by this health hazard. He is recorded to have passed a 4 to 6 inch long tapeworm from his body, which serves as a chastening illustration that even France's greatest sovereign was not immune from the repercussions of poor hygiene practices. The female courtiers were expected to participate in a gracious dining experience as if they were at a theater. They would engage in conversation and flirting, make toasts, and provide entertainment. Yet while performing these social duties with poise, several suffered from symptoms of nausea, cramping, and more devastating ailments as they quietly covered for themselves to avoid embarrassment. The most intimate and painful moment for a woman is giving birth. If you are a royal woman, the experience of childbirth will not only be painful, but also public. In the 17th century France, when a queen or a noblewoman went into labor, it was treated as a national event. The delivery room would be filled with courtiers, doctors, priests, and other noble observers who would be present only to watch, not assist. When Queen Marie Thérèse gave birth to her first child, the delivery room was so crowded that it looked more like a theater than a medical room. The reason for this crowd was that a royal birth had to be witnessed to avoid scandal. People were concerned that if a stillborn or female baby was born, it could be switched for a healthy male heir. Thus, the whole process had to be witnessed from the moment of labor until the arrival of the baby. This meant that the mother, likely suffering extreme pain and emotional distress, was surrounded by an audience while she gave birth, at one of the most vulnerable times of her life. Women who gave birth during the time of Marie Antoinette experienced a complete lack of privacy, dignity, and only being treated as objects of expectation. In one of the most famous accounts, Marie Antoinette fainted just after having her child because of the great heat, large number of people in her room, and overall emotional stress that she was under, and many other women were in the same situation. There were many women who also fainted during childbirth, who cried or suffered complications during childbirth due to the same kind of situation. With very little medical knowledge and no antibiotics available, childbirth was a dangerous time for every woman. Approximately 33% of all babies born did not live past their third birthday. Mothers were also at risk of dying due to a number of reasons, especially from infections resulting from unclean hands and poor hygiene during medical procedures at childbirth. Therefore, while royal births, and in some cases, the birth of a future king or queen, were viewed as national celebrations, they also carried a heavy burden of anxiety and physical pain for women giving birth under pressure, surveillance, and an overwhelming sense of fear. The true story, rarely written about, of royal women from the golden halls of history. While they wore beautiful dresses, spent time in lavishly scented rooms, and wore sparkling crowns, the reality is that these women lived lives of hardship, humiliation, and peril that would make today's readers recoil in horror. They conveyed images of high class and elegance, but when they returned to their private quarters, they fought each other, endured hardships, and lived their lives in ways that the vast majority of history books fail to mention. If you think being a member of the aristocracy means attending countless balls, participating in lavish feasts, and wearing fabulous gowns, then you are mistaken. These women were just as human as the rest of us. If you enjoy delving into the past and learning about people from long ago, please do so. Continue to explore your heritage. It is never just intriguing, but rather it can also be quite disgusting.